First to the ongoing COVID situation in New South Wales. The national plan to exit COVID lockdowns is at risk of unravelling. Vaccination thresholds for the adult population have been set down for moving on from lockdowns to living with the virus. Now, some state and territory leaders are questioning that plan, given the high case numbers in New South Wales. The Prime Minister is publicly appealing to premiers and chief ministers to stick with it. Political reporter Melissa Clark has the latest from Canberra.
The issue is that circumstances have changed over the last few weeks. Last month, that was when Commonwealth, state, territory leaders all agreed to this four-phase plan, and that was to get to phase 2, when there's 70% of vaccination of the eligible population, we'll only have targeted lockdown. Phase 3, get to 80%, and lockdowns are a rare exception. But since that was agreed, there's been a really significant growth in the caseload in New South Wales. We're now seeing around 800 cases a day. We're seeing it spread across more parts of regional New South Wales, cases growing Victoria too. And we're seeing premiers like Gladys Berejiklian in New South Wales discussing easing some restrictions once they hit a different vaccination target, perhaps 6 million in New South Wales. And so these developments have been pretty concerning for some of the other leaders, and perhaps most notably West Australian Premier Mark McGowan. He's reserving the right to continue with lockdowns even beyond the 70% and 80% vaccination thresholds that everyone had agreed to, wanting to keep pursuing zero COVID. Now, this has prompted a pretty furious response from the federal government. We've had them pointing out that federal financial support might not be available if state leaders pursue this kind of zero COVID approach once we get to those 70 and 80% thresholds. But it seems even those threats aren't working, because today we've seen Prime Minister Scott Morrison have to use a public press conference to directly appeal to state leaders.
The national plan is our deal with all Australians. It is the understanding that we have with Australians making their sacrifices now, who have made them over such a long time, that sacrifice will get them to the next step. Because if not at 70% and 80%, then when? Then when? We must make that move, and we must prepare to make that move, and we must prepare the country to make that move.
That's Scott Morrison there. And Melissa, it's not just the premiers and chief ministers that Scott Morrison wants to reassure, he's reassuring the public as well.
Look, there's certainly a lot of concern, not only from the Prime Minister but other national leaders here as well, about lockdown fatigue, that with case numbers remaining so high in New South Wales, with the location spreading, that people are either sick of restrictions, having been under them for so long, or simply don't have faith anymore that they're actually going to work, that they're actually going to deliver the promise of getting COVID case numbers down to a more manageable level, or that both of those things apply for some people. So Scott Morrison has been trying to offer some reassurance, noting that a lot of people are struggling, both physically, mentally, and emotionally, and economically with these lockdowns.
And I think these lockdowns are a demonstration of that. But the dawn is not far away, and we are working towards that dawn, and we are hastening towards it. We should not delay it. We should prepare for it. We should not fear it. We should embrace it.
That's the Prime Minister Scott Morrison there. Sally Sara speaking to Melissa Clark, and as you heard, he's declared that Australia must learn to live with COVID. What does that actually look like? We know that vaccination is one way, but some workplaces are looking to rapid antigen tests to stamp out COVID in the workplace. As Catherine Gregory reports.
Vixenaya owns a renovations company in Western Sydney, one of the COVID hotspots. When I spoke to him, he was waiting in line to get a COVID test.
This is, surveillance. I've got to get it every 3 days. I've had my first jab, so I've got to get it every 3 days, otherwise I can't work. test. It's an extra test. It can be done on a mass screening scale at a much lower cost.
PCR tests aren't cheap. Pathology labs get around $80 to $100 from Medicare per test.
And of course, yes, there was hesitancy about market share and from pathology groups wanting to say, no, all tests must come into the pathology system. I come from a background more of health emergency response, where, in rapid detection tests like this are how you chase and get rid of a major outbreak.
That report from Catherine Gregory. From COVID-19 to the other big story dominating the world at the moment, and the Prime Minister says Australian soldiers in Kabul are working in some of the most extreme conditions they've ever experienced. Scott Morrison says Australian and Allied forces have been able to evacuate more than 1,000 Australians and Afghan visa holders, with more evacuation flights anticipated. But the situation on the ground does remain uncertain and chaotic. The BBC's Lise Doucet reports from the tarmac at Hamid Karzai International Airport in Kabul.
It hits you as soon as you put your foot on the tarmac of this airfield, the intensity and the urgency of this moment. Every direction we looked at Kabul International Airport, Afghan and foreigners in straight lines boarding the military transport planes that are all around this tarmac, taking Afghans not just away from their country, but away from the lives that they live, the identity they cherish, leaving everything behind to start from scratch.
Today is the day that a generation of Afghans have buried their dreams and aspirations in our lives. This city to us is our home, despite its contradictions. We called it home. We raised from here. We hope the Taliban can learn from the lessons of the past and everyone else, and we can prove that we can move away from the tanks and bullets towards a road where everyone can see themselves.
This urgent evacuation is one that no one expected, nobody wanted, and no one will forget. There are said to be more than 10,000, close to 14,000 people now in this airfield waiting to board a flight to take them anywhere out of this country, foreigners as well as Afghans. There are thousands more Afghans, a rush of Afghans embracing the airport to try to get on one of these flights. Afghans have an expression when they travel, "Sabar hosh," may your journey be happy. Some will be so relieved that some of them will have spent days outside waiting to get inside the area, trying to get through. It's taken some people days to get in because of the people who are pushing outside of the gates. Little children, families, not knowing what kind of life they're heading to.
That's the BBC's Lise Doucet reporting from the tarmac on Kabul's international airport, and you will hear some of those people trying to flee Kabul, get out of the country a little later here on ABC News Radio. Let's check the latest news headlines though first. Victoria's Premier Daniel Andrews says up to 10,000 vaccine appointments are being wasted every day due to no-shows and cancellations. More than 50,000 appointments currently available across the state. The crew on board a cargo ship heading to Fremantle Port in Western Australia should be tested for COVID-19 after more than half reported feeling unwell. And the US Vice President Kamala Harris is meeting Singaporean leaders today on a trip to Southeast Asia aimed at strengthening ties with key allies in the region. You are listening to ABC News Radio. Jamie Travers with you on this Monday, the 23rd day of August. Well, back home, and former federal Liberal MP Craig Kelly has announced he's taking over as leader of Clive Palmer's political party. Mr. Kelly election analyst, and he joins me now. Anthony, what did you make of this move from Mr. Kelly?
Oh, well, I think he's probably got more benefit. Well, probably got benefit for both Clive Palmer and Craig Kelly. But I mean, realistically, if he recontests Hughes, he's really going to struggle to get re-elected without his Liberal Party label. Elected the Liberal at every election since 2010 without the support of the party, which holds a seat margin of about 10%. His chances of victory are unlikely. As to, I can't see that he's going to bring that much to the United Australia Party either, apart from the fact that both are talking about Australia, unusual treatments for COVID-19 in opposing vaccination, in opposing lockdowns.
There was some thinking that Craig Kelly might be looking at a Senate run, but he seems to have confirmed that he will run in the seat of Hughes. Would he not have had more luck retaining a spot in Parliament had he gone for the Senate?
Well, he personally would. I mean, the issue in the Senate is an election of parties. Would the United Australia Party do well enough in New South Wales to elect Craig Kelly? To get elected to the Senate, you roughly need about half a quota, which is about 67%. You can't get 67%, you're not going to get elected. The United Australia Party got 3.4% across the country at the last election. That was in the lower house, slightly lower in the upper house. I think, look, I mean, Clive Palmer spent a huge amount of money last time and got 3.5 to 7 votes. I can't see that he's suddenly going to break through and do better than that. There's an advantage for him that there's talk that they could be toughening up the party registration rules and increasing membership registration from 500 to 1,500. But if you've got an MP in federal parliament, you don't need members for your party. So having Craig Kelly as an MP as the frontman for United Australia Party assists in the party's registration. Whether it does much for actually getting elected, I'm not sure.
What you talk about the Clive Palmer money he spent, an inordinate amount of money at the last federal election. Was there an impact on those tens of millions of dollars that he spent at the last election?
Oh yeah, I think he had a significant role in the Labor Party losing the election. The tax on food short reinforced lots of good things probably already had. Huge spend. He did absolutely nothing for his point to get Clive Palmer's candidate elected, but he had did a lot of damage to Labor. He tried it again at the Queensland election last October. Huge spend, but he got a negligible amount of votes. I think some of his campaigning around that on anti-vaccination, his campaign to try and open Western Australia's borders have not helped his cause. And come the next election, he's not going to be the only party campaigning on an anti-vaccination platform. I still like him. You can't discount the fact that he will spend a lot of money, which means he has a better chance in United Australia Party than most other small parties. But realistically, he's been on the political scene spending a lot of money in elections for quite a number of years now. But he could still only get 3.5% last time, so it doesn't strike me he's now suddenly going to start breaking through, especially Queensland and Western Australia, two states where he's traditionally done better, where he's got his comic with campaigns against lockdowns.
Just finally, on Craig Kelly, I mean, the odds of him winning as an independent.
And he's doing the whole metropolitan area, and there just aren't enough local media to have an impact nowadays. So I'd be surprised if he could turn the figures around. I mean, it's for a party, he's going to get 25% of the vote. Most independents are lucky to get above 10%, even if they're a former member. It takes a special. There's only a tiny number of independents who really do well enough to be competitive in a seat.
All right, well, you'll be dusting off the election night suit and tie, I imagine, within the next 9 months. Anthony Green, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Anthony Green is the ABC's election analyst. He's ready and raring for the next federal election, I'm sure. from the sports desk as we head towards AFL finals. Catherine Murphy, hello to you.
Hello, Jamie, and happy Monday to you. We potentially should have kept him on the line. It might be even easier to predict an election than where the AFL Grand Final is going. I'm tipping he wouldn't be backing the MCG right now, unfortunately. The AFL says a lack of West Australian sides in the finals and Port Adelaide's second place finish will have no bearing on where the Grand Final is played. The MCG, it's highly unlikely to host the Grand Final, while Perth is the favourite. Adelaide also in the running. Depending on who you listen to, Perth is a done deal. If the Adelaide Oval was picked, it could host a Grand Final featuring Port Adelaide. But the AFL's General Manager of Clubs and Broadcasting, Travis Old, says that won't come into their thinking.
No, I mean, we see each year, could have happened last year in Queensland with the Brisbane Lions, and so I think the priority is firstly to work out whether we have a grand final of the MCG, second where we have it from there.
Expansion of the NRL takes another step forward today as the three hopeful Brisbane groups meet with the Rugby League Commission. Representatives of the Redcliffe Dolphins, the Brisbane Jets and the Brisbane Firehawks are set to make 1-hour presentations to the NRL Expansion Committee in Brisbane. It's the last pitch before the committee decides which bid, if any, will become the NRL's newest club. We'll keep you up to date on how those presentations go. Meanwhile, Australian tennis player Ash Barty has defeated Jill Teichmann 6-3, 6-1 to win the WTA tournament in Cincinnati. The 25-year-old now has 5 titles this year and has found form ahead of next week's US Open. After the match, Barty thanked her team for getting her through the season so far.
On the road for near 6 months, and it's been a joy every single day. So thank you so much for you guys for hanging in there with me. It's been awesome. You kept me in one piece.
Ash Barty, always talking about her team, never herself. For Homebird, it's been especially difficult for her not to be able to return to Australia. Meanwhile, Aussie Nick Kyrgios has pulled out of his first round match against Andy Murray in North Carolina with a knee injury. The 26-year-old is preparing for the US Open next week and had lined up the 250 tournament on the lowest tier of the men's tour. That really means there are 250 ranking points available, the lowest possible for an ATP event. So he said he wasn't going to risk his knee for that level of reward.
Am I going to push through 250 or am I going to get ready for a Grand Slam? Like, both of them I'll try to be a player. So if you want to play for Grand Slams, I'm not going to potentially put that at risk.
Cricketer Usman Khawaja says the friction between the Australian players and Justin Langer comes down to the coach's passionate approach. Khawaja was dropped from the Australian team by Langer and selector Trevor Johns in 2019, but believes he's the right coach for this summer's Ashes. The 34-year-old said it's up to the players and Langer to work through their problems.
At the end of the day, there is something there. A lot of these things stem from JL wearing his emotions on his sleeve and things going up and down and him following that ride. I think that puts the players off a little bit.
Italian cyclist Damiano Caruso has become the first rider to claim a mountain stage on 2 different Grand Tours this year after winning stage 9 of the Tour of Spain. The 33-year-old broke away with 70 kilometres of the stage to go, crossing the line more than a minute ahead. Race leader Primož Roglic finished second to strengthen his overall lead. Australia's Jack Haig came in 4th spot and he sits 4th overall in the general classification. But just going back to the tennis, that Kyrgios-Murray match was awkward because all the fans were in the stadium in North Carolina, and Nick Kyrgios and Andy Murray are great friends. They had that famous/infamous Instagram live during the middle of lockdown last year, lockdown number 1, 2 or 3, and it involved a lot of charades. Was then deleted off the internet, but their friendship became iconic and people were very disappointed that Nick Kyrgios couldn't play. Jamie,
A charades-fueled Zoom session in lockdown number we can't remember is very 2020/2021, Catherine Murphy. I appreciate the reminiscence from you.
thank you.
next half. And Catherine Murphy with all the latest sports news here on ABC News Radio. Let's have a look at your capital city weather for the rest of your Monday. Let's start in Brisbane. 24 degrees currently, chasing 25, a sunny one, mostly sunny one, excuse me. At Sydney, late rain with a possible storm, 27 the max, 22.5 degrees at the moment. 19 degrees at the top in Canberra, you're almost there, a rainy one, the nation's capital. Speaking of rain, showers increasing in Melbourne, 13.5 degrees, going to 14 currently. Hobart, showers are clearing though. The mercury predicted to get up to 13 degrees, 11 now. If you're in Adelaide, showers as well, a max of 14 for you, 10 degrees at the moment. But to the west of the country, and Perth is sunny, chasing at 19 degrees, 16 now. Sunny in the top end, 33 the max in Darwin, 31 degrees now. Time for the latest news bulletin. Glenn Lauder's got it for you right now.
ABC News with Glenn Lauder. An intensive care doctor in New South Wales says she's concerned by the amount of young people being admitted to her hospital because of COVID-19. There have been 818 new cases in the state today. 3 people in their 80s have died. Around 160,000 tests were carried out in the reporting period. Dr. Nai Nguyen from Nepean Hospital west of Sydney says the Delta strain is disproportionately affecting young, unvaccinated people.
They are staying in intensive care for longer and they are needing care that can't be provided anywhere else in the wards. There are those who are on breathing machines and on heart-lung machines. Up to 25% of them have been less than 40 years old.
Outback Health Providers says there's widespread take-up and strong acceptance of COVID vaccines. Another airlift of Pfizer doses is on its way to Aboriginal communities in Western New South Wales. There have been 3 new cases in the far west of the state today, but another 15 recorded after the 8 p.m. cut-off and will be included in tomorrow's figures. Executive Director of the Royal Flying Doctor Service, Frank Quinlan, says Indigenous communities are showing a strong willingness to get vaccinated.
There's a sort of rolling acceptance, provided there's been good education happening beforehand. Good engagement with Indigenous leaders and elders has meant that the take-up has been huge.
Victoria's recorded 71 new cases today. 49 of those are linked to known outbreaks. 14 of today's new cases are in Shepparton, taking the regional towns cluster to 36. Testing Commander Jerome Weimar says cases have also spread into new Melbourne suburbs, including Essendon West, Camberwell, Thornbury and Sorrento on the Mornington Peninsula.
Where we find one case, we are very likely to find more. For all of us, wherever we're living in the state, we need to be really aware COVID can just be around the corner. We can still grab this and get hold of this and manage these numbers down, but that's going to require all of us to work together.
Queensland has recorded 1 new local case. It's linked to Brisbane's Indooroopilly cluster, but that person has been in home quarantine throughout their infectious period. Queensland's Chief Health Officer, Dr. Jeanette Young, says the greatest COVID risk to the state lies south of the border.
We are seeing increased cases getting closer and closer to our border, so it's only a matter of time before one of them crosses. Our police are doing an amazing job. They are absolutely brilliant at what they're doing, but eventually it will cross.
The senior government minister Karen Andrews says the states and territories need to stop questioning the data underpinning the vaccine targets Australia needs to reach to reopen. Some states and territories have publicly questioned the modelling around the agreed thresholds. Under the roadmap, lockdowns become less necessary at a 70% vaccination rate and become rare and highly targeted at 80%. Andrews says the states need to trust the plan they agreed to.
Australians want life to get back to normal as soon as it possibly can. And quite frankly, their mental health is not helped by people endlessly going on about the data isn't accurate. We have a plan, we need to be implementing it.
New Zealand's recorded 35 new COVID cases within the past 24 hours. It takes the total number of infections in the country to 107 as part of the current outbreak. New Zealand's cabinet will decide later today if the lockdown will be extended. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern is expected to make an announcement this afternoon. government says it will consider following suit if the US decides to extend its deadline of withdrawal from Afghanistan. Another 470 people have been evacuated from Kabul to a military base near Dubai on 4 Australian flights. Foreign Minister Maurice Payne says the situation on the ground remains challenging for Australian and allied personnel.
The most significant challenge continues to be access to Hamid Karzai International Airport, although we have been able to continue to get people into the airport. Our continued focus is on bringing out every Australian and Australian visa holder that we possibly can, and supporting those vulnerable Afghanis to move if we possibly can.
The Northern Territory police say they hold serious concerns for a man who's been missing in waters off the northwest coast of the Northern Territory for 2 days. The 28-year-old had been aboard a boat with 2 others in a channel between Wadair and Doherty Island, around 250 kilometres southwest of Darwin, before it capsized on Saturday night. Police say the 2 other occupants managed to swim to shore after the incident and were treated for shock and exposure. ABC News.
Thanks, Glenn. You're listening to ABC News Radio. Jamie Travers with you on this Monday, the 23rd of August. It's 25 to 2 in the east of the country, 1:05 in Central Australia, and good morning again to you, Western Australia, 25 minutes to 12.
You're listening to ABC News Radio.
In this half an hour, the New South Wales Premier looks beyond the daily COVID numbers.
The number we really need to focus on is the vaccination rate. Once we hit 70% double dose, we'll be able to live life more freely.
Afghan interpreters risking life and limb to get to Kabul airport. You'll hear from one of them. And a big win for the National Party, agricultural visas given the green light. To New South Wales first, and it seems that the goal of returning to COVID-0 is slipping through the fingers of the state government, as New South Wales records another 818 coronavirus cases. But the Premier, Gladys Berejiklian, says some freedoms will be restored when the state hits its target of 6 million jabs earlier than expected. Health experts and other premiers, however, aren't so convinced by her optimism, as Alexia Atwood reports.
818 new cases, with many in the community while infectious. Life in New South Wales without COVID seems a distant memory.
I don't want us to focus so much on the case numbers going up and down. Absolutely want to see the case numbers go down, no doubt about that, and we're working so hard together to make that possible. But the number we really need to focus on is the vaccination rate.
Vaccinations are the centre of Gladys Berejiklian's message, and her goal of 6 million jabs by the end of August might come early, by the end of this week.
In relation to the 6 million jabs and schools going back, I said that we'd have more to say about that towards the end of this week, and we will. We'll be able to communicate what additional freedom people might have once they get to full vaccination during September, and we'll also outline our plan for schools.
But is it wise to loosen restrictions when the state hits 6 million jabs, when in reality it means only around 30% of adults will be fully vaccinated? Here's epidemiologist Tony Blakely.
Well, if I was purely speaking to the SARS-related, the COVID-related mortality, morbidity, absolutely not. But we live in society, and we've got things called economies, and we've got things called unintended consequences of SARS. So I do think it's really important for the New South Wales people who have been in a really tough spot for 2 months to get something. It'll be very modest, but it might be something like where 2 families have both been fully vaccinated, they can now come together as a combined bubble, say. Or people where the family's fully vaccinated and the person who wants to visit them is vaccinated could come and visit. So reasonably modest things like that would be okay. I wouldn't do much more than that. But something just to give some sense of go forward for New South Wales, I think, is really important.
Economic and health benefits aside, the issue of relaxing restrictions without controlling case numbers is a political flashpoint. Opposite Gladys Berejiklian in the ring is her across-the-Nullarbor opponent, WA Premier Mark McGowan.
That's not the plan. That is not the plan. That is the real threat. But that's what they do. That is the real threat to the people of New South Wales and the entire country. If they do that, their hospitals will be overrun and people will die in large numbers.
Mark McGowan accused accuses Gladys Berejiklian of making excuses when she blames the Delta variant for not aiming for COVID zero.
Look, in the case of the New South Wales government, it's self-inflicted. They did it because they didn't take the measures that were available, and it's not fair on the people of New South Wales.
Reclassifying New South Wales as a place of extreme risk, WA is no longer even accepting people from the state on compassionate grounds, even if they're fully vaccinated. That's different to South Australia, which will begin the first trial of home quarantine for travellers returning from New South Wales and Victoria this week. Geolocation and facial recognition software will be used to track people who will be contacted at random and required to prove their location within 15 minutes. The state's health minister, Stephen Wade, says it expects to report the trial to National Cabinet within weeks.
We're certainly not going to roll out the program until we're confident that it won't lead to an outbreak. We'll need to have quarantine arrangements in place for months, if not years to come. And we need to make sure that our measures are sustainable and also, to be frank, that they're scalable.
Alexia Atwood with that report. You heard there at the end from the South Australian Health Minister, Stephen Wade, discussing the ongoing situation in New South Wales here on ABC News Radio. Well, looking overseas, and the federal government